So this video is about using Google Earth to do video playback of your canine teams. It is tended to be better used by area handlers, but as I mentioned as you go through here, I do believe it has some uses for trailing and HRD depending on what you're doing with HRD. If you want to support my team, that's who's getting the donations from this video. So if you find it useful and would like to donate, that would be great. And then this is me. So I've been an area handler for about 30 years now. I've been using map items for 15, 20 years, and Google Earth in particular for probably the last 10 years. This presentation is a bit in three sections. The first section is what I call the straight down view in Google Earth, how to import your files, how to adjust your files, then how to play them back. And then the middle section is using a more detailed button that Google Earth allows. It has some pros and cons, and I discuss those as part of that section. And then the last section of this is aimed a bit more at area handlers. It's simply some playbacks of mine historically and the kind of data that I'm looking for as an area handler and things I've learned from the playback when I kind of sat down and looked at them, versus how the actual search event went. So this presentation is going to be about using Google Earth to play back your and your dog's GPS tracks. Generally speaking, this is most useful to the area handlers, but it can be useful to cadaver handlers depending on what you're doing exactly. And I believe it can be useful to the trailing handlers, especially kind of the middle part of this, which goes over a button that's down that'll show up down here. It gives you a lot more flexibility on speed. So it for trailing, it would allow you to play back the trail as laid, and then also see your the dog's tracks on top of that. That's hard to do in the first section, the straight down view, but I think it could be useful for a trailing dog. So in this view, if you're familiar with Google Earth, I'm just going to move this north up real quick um, and make sure that I've got the view reset so that we're just looking straight down on stuff. Um, the tracks I'm going to use are a little bit different than this, and I'm going to import those. So importing tracks is really just a import file kind of thing. If you're using a 320 or 430, the older GPSs, you would need to save the tracks off the GPS and onto your computer. You could just plug your GPS in and go get them there if you're good with file manipulation. On the 200s, 300s, you should be able to use Garmin Explorer or the Garmin Alpha app if you're using that to basically file those away somewhere that's then accessible by your laptop. Um, Remember that this is Google Earth Pro, which you need to download from the internet. They have a web based version now that they kind of try to make you use, but these features don't work in that. So you want the downloadable version of Google Earth Pro, and it's free. And all of these features are free, so you don't have to pay for anything. So what I'm going to do first is import. It's two tracks and some waypoints, um, and then I'll show you how to set those up and play them back. The first thing we're going to go over is what I call the straight down view. It's my preferred view because it just kind of shows me and the dog, straight down, looking down on the terrain. And then we're going to go over using a little button that shows up here, which allows you to angle the view. And it kind of has some pros and cons. The major pro is that it gives you a little more speed control than the straight down view. And then at the end of this presentation, I'm going to put a few of the videos that I have found useful for my dog as an area dog, what I'm looking for when I review them. So you can kind of see some of the data you can pull from these playbacks. So you're going to go up to File and Import to choose the files that you may want to import into what you're doing. In this case, I'm pulling some back from September. So there's a dog collar file, a file for me, and then, oops, I also had several waypoints from this day. I'm going to check that so I don't get it twice. You can select several in a row. And the one thing I'll point out is I've been playing on this, so it didn't show it. But this part, the type of file, tends to default to something else. So make sure if you don't see the files you're looking for, make sure you drop this down and select all files at the very bottom. And then the GPX files will show up. Like I said, you can select more than one and import them all at the same time. So in this case, I have a dog collar, my handheld track, and then 3 waypoints. And I'm going to open those. And pretty much for each one of those, and I'm going to check that as well, it's going to ask this question. And it's going to move the map up to where those are all at. So you'll see it brought in a waypoint. It's going to bring in a track, another waypoint. And I'm just going to click on OK for all of those, and you see things beginning to occur. So one of the cool features in Sartopo is that Sartopo allows you to export a bunch of its map layers into Google Earth. And I believe you need a pro account or a team account. And if you go over to Sartopo and you click on your membership, the page that comes up includes right in the middle, it includes this. And you'll notice that the first one is exporting to Google Earth or ArcGIS. So if you click on this link as it's presented to you, it will put map layers into Google Earth. And it's a one-time, once it's in Google Earth, unless you do something like change a computer, it stays there. So it's a really, really handy thing. And I have that in my Google Earth, needless to say. And you'll notice over here on the left, if I open up map layers, I have a whole bunch that are straight out of Sartopo. The caution on these, you're more than welcome to play with them and see what they get. Some of them overlay on the aerial as shown in Google Earth. Some of them take over the page. So a good example of that is if you show scanned topos, and it may take it a minute to download this, right? See, the old-fashioned scanned topos take over the page. But look at the information it gives me, right? This is a lot easier to tell that, for instance, right here, I have quite a big gully. It's hard to tell that on just looking at the aerial. But one of the more useful ones in here is if you scroll down just a little bit, they have these two, the 40-foot and the 10-foot. And I'll let the 40 come up so you can see the orange lines that come up that are showing you some of the terrain without getting rid of the Google aerial. And then I'll also do the 10-foot. It makes the 40-foot lines kind of stand out, and then it adds even more lines. So it's a really good representation of your terrain, but it overlays on top of that Google Earth aerial. So I find that particularly useful, and I pretty much have these orange lines selected for our area most of the time. And I'm just going to close map layer, so I could, because I'm going to be using these files that I brought in. So one other file that I'm going to bring in is, this was a training search that I had a little while back. But one of the things you see is missing is like, what was my area? And when you want to, we do everything in Sartopo, so we plan things in Sartopo. Um, the quirk, if you create an item in Sartopo and try to import it, it doesn't always work very well. But if you export from Sartopo as an actual KML file, which is Google Earth's base type, if you do that, then you can export a line or a polygon, and Google Earth will accept it. If you try to export it as a GPX file, it won't always accept it. So in this case, I exported them earlier in that file, and you can see that this was my plan for this particular training, was the blue area. So just keep that in mind. If you export those out of Sartopo as a KML, it tends to work pretty well. You can now usually export Sartopo files, tracks, out, and they're usable in Google Earth. Sartopo used to strip the timestamp off of them, and that was not a true statement. But lately, I've noticed that even if you track yourself in Sartopo, using your phone, that you can import that data and play it back in Google Earth. It does tend to prefer the GPX from the actual GPSs, but it seems to be an option at least now. So when you pull in all these files, this is what they look like. There's actually two tracks here. These light blue faded lines. And then you'll notice I have 3 waypoints. This area on the top left pops up, which is actually your playback option. It's got a few quirks to it, but before we step through that, I'm going to step through just visually helping yourself with these files. So over on the left, you'll see the files that I've brought in. And if I open all the little tabs or arrows here, you'll begin to see the details of the waypoints, and then the details of the tracks as I scroll down here. So there's a series of things that I usually go through um, that just makes these a little more livable and viewable. The waypoints I'm going to leave alone, but I will show you that you have options with the waypoint. So if you right click on these base files, whether it's the waypoint there or the track down here, if you right click, you get some options, one of them being properties. So I'm going to right click, go to properties, and I can rename that waypoint if I want to. It tells me where that waypoint is, but I can also change the style and color. So if I want my little icon to be yellow, let's say, right, it'll turn it yellow, or the label and the icon to be yellow. I can turn it yellow. I can change the size of them. And actually with this little button right here, I can actually pick a different style. For today's purpose, I'm going to leave them where they at, but you do have some options here. And if you're really good and want to pull in some custom icons, you can do that as well. So I'm just going to leave this one at yellow, and the other ones will be white. But that is some manipulation you can do with the waypoints. When you go down to the tracks, that's usually where you're going to do the best manipulation. So again, if I right click on that, I get a properties icon and I get a style color. In this case, I am going to actually rename this just to make it a little bit shorter, which tends to just look better. I'm going to turn the dog a dark blue. All of the things related to the dog, I always tend to turn the same color. You don't have to. And then what I have found is that a line width of about 2, and you want it 100% opaque, which means you don't see through it at all. that tends to play better. And then on the label and the icon, I usually put in 0.5. Again, these are just, you can play around with those and decide what kind of view you prefer. So that's what I will change all of my track displayed settings to. You can also change the icon again on these. I haven't really found one that looks better than an arrow, but if you're into that thing, you can look around. So that changes, and you notice now I have one light blue line as they pulled in, and I have one dark blue line. So if I go down here, this is the handheld /me track. I'm going to change that to be very short. And I usually put myself in an opposing color. Just makes it easier to review. So I'm going to pick red in this case. And again, I go back. And you can use these little buttons if it's quicker for you. I reduce the size of that, and then I make sure this is 100% opaque. And I'm going to say OK. So now I have one named DJ, one named Blue, and I have my 3 waypoints. And you can see that that view becomes a lot more clean and crisp as to what is actually going on. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, right? Okay, so this part up here, this is the GPS playback, and there's a few quirks to it that you need to know. The only place you have to manipulate this is this little wrench right here. And it's not very much. It really is not very much. Um, the it gives you this time of start and end. So this one took me about 20 minutes from start to end. And it gives you animation speed. The quirk of speed in this view is that it pretty much decides the speed based on this time frame up here. So one is, if you're going to use Google Earth with your GPS tracks, you need to clear both your track and the dog track right before you start, so that you don't have 20 minutes of standing around and a 20-minute problem that you're looking at, because you just can't control the playback speed very well. So you really want to clear both tracks on your handheld right before you get started. And then when you finish, you want to save them fairly quickly on the finish. And that just gives you the best playback that Google Earth is going to be able to do in this view. If you have a very long problem, it may speed things up. If it's a very, very short problem, it may slow it down. And the only place you have to further adjust speed is down here. And I pretty much always keep it in the slower. And you'll notice it's still fairly quick. So I'm going to leave it in the slower for now. Again, it's a feature you can play with. So that's pretty much the only settings you have. The zoom in, as far as I can tell, doesn't really work. And then you have this slider bar, and you have this little play feature. So this little icon, the arrow, almost the up arrow as I'll call it, right? It's the play, right? So if I push it backwards, you'll notice my track goes away. If I move it forwards, you'll notice my track plays out. The little half moon icon is important. It deletes it, right? And when you first come in here, they tend to be moving together. So if you play, this little button here is play. If you play, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. I can see these names. And the reason is because these two things are moving together, right? So it's playing them and deleting them basically at the same time. And you'll see if I just grab the moon and move it, that now I have some gap between play and erase, right? But you'll see in this case, it's playing over here, it's erasing here. So what you want to do before you get too far is separate those as much as possible. Grab the arrow, move it all the way right, grab the little moon, and move it all the way left. And that way, when you play it, it will play the whole thing and then it'll start erasing. And that gives you time to review it, video capture it, whatever you want to do. So once you separate these and then pull the little up arrow backwards and then hit play, it'll play out everything and you'll see the little moon is not moving. So here's me and the dog heading out to do the search. And you'll notice the waypoints are also time stamped. So that's when I noticed behavior and I marked it. This is when I noticed behavior and I marked it. And again, they're at the 6. And then you'll see the dog goes in to make the find and comes back. Does a bunch of refines. So that's how you can get this to play back. And if I just let this keep playing, again, the delete will run all the way out and it'll delete the whole thing for you. I'm not really sure. You can just press this button and pause it if you need to and redo it again if you want to. I tend to either screen grab that playback if you have a screen grab. A lot of times I simply film the screen with my iPhone in slow motion, which allows me to further slow down either the whole track or part of the track. So if I'm trying to kind of overanalyze something, I have that capability. So that's how to use Google Earth to look at this top-down view. I can change some things like tilt angle. It's really, I call it a top-down view because that tends to be how I look at Google Earth. You can force an angle and it'll just play it back as well, but it's really hard to control in Google Earth. So I think it's better done just looking straight down at it. You can see where the dog is from you and that kind of thing in this view. The other view that you can use, and we'll go over this next, is this little button right here. It pops up once you have GPS tracks in here, and it has a little more capability than this view, but it also has some cons. So we're going to talk about that next. So this little button, as I mentioned, pops up once you bring waypoints or playback tracks in, and it shows you a slightly different view than this straight down view that we just did. If I simply go in here, you'll see the first major difference in that the background spun around, right? It's showing my tracks. And the reason the background is spinning around is over here on the left. I have the person's track selected and it spins the direction so that the person essentially is always going kind of up. So you don't ever want to track it to the dog one because you'll probably get seasick. And the people one at least is usually changing directions a little less. But you can see from this view already that I have more speed control here. This plays back a little slower. And I just have a bit of adjustments. And that's just a quirk of the map. But the con of this, I think, is this spinning background. The pro of this is because of the slower speed, I think it's a little easier sometimes to tell where you are versus the dog. And also for like a trailing dog or even a cadaver dog, because you can slow that speed down quite a bit, you could, for instance, run a trail with a person an hour before or an hour after they lay it. You could have them run a track and then you run a track. And because you can slow everything down, you can actually see how those two things play out. That's difficult to do in the other view because you have little to no speed control. So when you push this button, you get this little playback area down here. And they're actually working together because you'll still see this upper icon move right. But this one is really ruled from this one down here. And for right now, I'm going to close that. And you'll notice in that, what I just closed, there's no little, like up here where you had the little wrench, there wasn't one there. And that's because what you can control on that one is under this tools icon. And if you go to tools and options, and it usually comes up on this one, 3D view, and you can do what you want there, but it doesn't have anything to do with this. But if you go to touring, this is where your options will pop up. Um, we're not really creating a tour from a folder, so these top ones don't apply. We're not really creating it from a line, but the two that do apply are the top two, the camera tilt angle and the camera range, and we'll go into those a little bit more. And then the speed control comes down here. This one under line doesn't impact anything, but when you come in with a track, this is where your speed control is. And it's basically multiples of real time. So you can play it 20 times faster or you can play it super slow. So there's a lot of power in this line as far as playback speed goes. The seconds between keyframes, I've not really seen that impact much on the playback. And this is kind of for something else if you're going to record a tour, which actually doesn't record in a way that's super useful. So I'm going to cancel out of this real quick. I'm going to zoom out here just so I was hoping that X would go away. I'm not sure why it's lost part of the map there. There we go. No, still doesn't like it zoomed in. So we're going to stay about there. So with the settings I have in there right now, which I'm going to remind everybody of. So I have almost no camera tilt angle, which means I'm as close to looking down as that straight down view, right? The camera range is how many meters out from that track am I? So in my case, I have it set to 500. Again, this speed doesn't mean anything, and I've got this speed set about mid-range. Okay, so when I press this button, it's going to spin around, and it zooms in to that 500-meter range. So the view, I can't manipulate the view because it's set by being 500 meters up from where that red line is, because I have that selected over here on the left. Okay, so you can see about how fast this is, right? And it's a lot more controlled than the straight on down view. But it's a good view when you put that camera angle pretty small, because it keeps you as close to straight down as possible, right? So that's where you see a dog break out. And just like the other one, the waypoints come in, it plays back the same way as that. So I'm going to go change a parameter so you can see the difference here. And one of the things is you have to close this bottom one if you go change a parameter, because it doesn't seem, if you just go to tools and do it, it doesn't seem to apply unless you close out that window and come back in. So I've just gotten into a habit. So I'm just going to change this first, the 45 degree. So this is going to apply an OK. And again, when I press this button, it's going to start over. But now you can see my whole background has tilted to 45 degrees, right? And Google Earth does have a bit of a 3D view in it. So this may be useful to you. I still tend to prefer reading the map contours. But sometimes these angled views are pretty good with if you've got significant terrain, you can actually see that pretty well in these views. So again, my speed's the same. In this case, I'm just taking a little bit more of an angle on the actual view that I'm looking at. And the background's still spinning because it's tagged to that handler line and the direction the handler is going at the time. So again, I'm going to close this and go back to tools. And in this case, I'm going to change the camera range, and I'm just going to cut that in half to 250 meters. And you can see you can go way out here, and you can actually probably go quite a ways in, but the spinning background might get you. I'm going to apply. Okay. I'm going to press this little button again. And again, now you'll see that I'm zooming even further in. I'm closer to this track, right? I've got the 45-degree angle. It's drawing the stuff in the background. So if you feel like you would like a little more close-up view, I can't necessarily see my whole area. So the closer I come, the more I kind of lose my frame of reference for where I am in my area. But the better details I might see, for instance, between me and the dog. So each of these, I think, has some power to give you information. And I'm going to close this real quick. And just because it's easier to kind of see, I'm going to put my angle way up again and my distance back to where I started. But now I'm going to speed up my speed as much as possible. So this is as fast as this will go. Well, I guess I'll type it. Okay, so I'm going to speed that up as much as possible. And I've put the angles and distances back to where I started so you can just kind of see the difference. So this is a more down look view, a little further out view. And you'll see it's a bit faster than it was in the last view, but compared to the standard straight down view, it's quite a bit slower. So I've started doing this with a nearly zero angle, and it just gives me a lot more speed control. If I want to see where I am in my area, I could pull even my distance out a little bit more on this view, or I could do the straight down version. But it's good, really good for seeing where the dog is. And one thing I should mention is that your dog track tends to lag a little bit in time because the collar's sending it back to the handheld, and there is a delay in that. So a lot of times it looks like I make a decision and then my dog makes one, but really it's the other way around. I'm following her because her track is ever so slightly delayed. That's true, particularly when you're close together. On these, you can see from here when she pulls away from me, it's a lot less obvious. So that's just a speed difference under that one. Let me close this. In tools, and again, back to options. And I'm just going to set this back to about 12, which is a little bit slower. So that's how this part of or Google Earth works. So backing it up a bit. So if I want to just look at, and remember when you do the straight down view, it doesn't change the view. So if I want to see my whole area and how things played out, see if I can zoom out just enough to get rid of the X, right? Then I can play up here, and I'm going to let this one play all the way, right? So this is us starting up here. And this one plays back for 2 or 3 minutes. So usually its speed is not too bad unless there's something quite intricate I want to look at, or if I want to look at maybe where the dog is versus the terrain. Sometimes the angled view works a little bit better, right? So that's the playback there. And then if I want to use this button, again, I'm set at 500 meters out. And it's going to retract all of this up here and then start playing it again. And you can really see the speed difference here. So I don't know that I'll let this play all the way. You can come up here and kind of shift that a little bit so it starts in a slightly different place. Well, I guess not. You can do it here. I'm just going to make it speed up. But in the end, you end up with the same thing. You can also, on both of these, do what I was doing, which is kind of fast forward and slow down. If there's something you're particularly interested in locating, you can do it with both of them. So that's kind of a nice feature. So this is one of the videos I just wanted to discuss. This is an early in a career one for my young dog. And this particular area I'd never worked before, and it's a slope. Um, the left side is up, the right side is down. And we had a bit of a walk to get out there across the slope. So this section here that's not in the area actually took us about 20 minutes. And I started her all the way at the bottom. So she's loose, she's working. And when I originally reviewed this video, I realized that she and the dog I had previously were not the same. The dog I had previously was a very big, rangy dog, and this dog is not. So you'll notice right about here, though, when I dropped into my area, I marked body language and notice her range distance starting to increase. And then as we go a little bit further, she begins to cut down the hill and she makes the find right there. So when you're looking at you versus your dog, or your dog versus your dog, one of the things you're going to note is changes of behavior in their case. In her case, it was very much the range distance that I noticed on this video, and I learned that from this video. Even though I thought, trying to remember what actually happened, to see it on this video was super important to me as a handler. So this is another video, and I've got the slope lines in, similar to the last one. Left is uphill, right is the down lower portion. This was about a 70-acre area, fairly steep slope. And this was one where we started, and I know I had a person in my area, but I don't typically work problems this big in training. So you'll notice again, almost as soon as we drop into the area, I notice that she's showing some behaviors and I start marking them. And then she pulls a little ways downhill and I pulled with her because I'd marked twice already. And as soon as I pulled a little ways downhill with her, you'll see the end result in that she starts pulling away from me hard. And in fact, I'm trying to follow her on the GPS, and you can see I get a little bit out of place when she comes back and does her refind. And then as we're heading back down, you'll notice that she gets lost and tries to take a slightly different tack. And what I love about this video is it's a very long find down this slope. But on top of that, it shows very much that the wind conditions changed on her. So she pulled about halfway down and it was in the final direction, but then she made an adjustment to the north and took that down to make the find. So it's a reminder, and it's one of the things I think these videos are good for, is to really show you what wind is doing. I think we have a really simplistic view of what the wind might be doing as a scent cone, but these will show you that little things really impact what your dog is doing. And that's why you need to learn to watch behavior. But it's also why you need to teach your dog to work out wind conditions and get as much experience on them as you can. Okay, this is kind of a more complicated slope. It's got a pretty good slope within it, but the north end of this flattens out, the north end of the yellow area. We had to trek in a little bit to get to it. My goal was to kind of basically work the terrain pattern around. But as I did that, I realized that the bottom half of this did, in fact, have upslope. But every time I got out on the ridge, kind of towards the north end, I did not have upslope. I had a very big wind blowing left to right. So as I came across this bottom pass, I was really cognizant, and you'll begin to see her start really being rangy right about there. And she takes a big thing out. She turns, go in the direction I think she should. And then you see her make this weird out of the way adjustment. And then the refine start. And while that big adjustment seems really odd, because to me, wind was blowing left to right, but we had teams working in the fields north of this, and all of their dogs were hitting from the north. So gusty is gusty, which means momentarily that wind may shift. And in this case, the dog had to make up for that. So these videos can be really helpful to figuring out how much variety you're seeing on the wind and that your dog is seeing. And it bolsters the idea that they should be able to work through that. They need experience working a lot of conditions, and they need to be able to work through a lot of that. So this is actually the video of the problem that I used as the example during the Google Earth track part of this. So, like my earlier video, I started out of the area, and almost as soon as I entered, you see her range distance increase for me. And you'll see that I started to mark that change of behavior. She also pulled downhill, and I was leery of pulling too far down here hill at this point. Um, so I pulled forward. She wasn't in a hurry to go way downhill, but I marked it. I was tracking it. We kind of continued on that elevation, but didn't over go downhill. And as we continue, you'll notice she does it again. Again, kind of kitty corner downhill. She ranges out for me, circles back around to me, does it again. And her overall ranging now is getting fairly significant. And again, I mark it, and you'll see that I then start to adjust because now she is pulling downhill. So I mark it, I keep moving downhill with her, but not at a super tight angle because she's tending to pull forward and downhill. So I'm following her. I mark my last bit of interest, and she then gets to a distance. She checks back with me. She circles back around, and then she figures out the rest of the problem. And the interesting part to me in this video is that while we kitty corner basically almost directly southeast, the direction she makes the find is 90 degrees off of that. And what this video doesn't show is that that turn happens on an extremely rocky part of this slope. So below that rocky part, wind was blowing more southerly, maybe a little southwest. Once it got above those rocks, got higher on the hill, probably was a little warmer, then it started pushing north. And that's what this video shows. So again, it's a great example. For me, it's a great example of, yes, her ranginess means something, right? But it's also a great example of a changing wind condition. The reason she kept not taking that so hard was that change was hard for her to figure out. So she checked back with me, then branched out and figured it out on her own. So those are just some examples of kind of what I'm thinking about when I watch these videos. You can use Google Earth to look at distances. So you could, for instance, in this video, be able to look at it and say, okay, the find was 300, feet. The first bit of interest was, I think, about 800 feet. The full distance she traveled actually was like 1,100 feet. But you can look at a lot of different things even within Google Earth. You can do distances like that in Sartopo. Um, what are those data points versus the conditions you're working in? All of that stuff, I think, between mapping and Google Earth is data that's really worthwhile to the handler. So that is the end of the presentation for using Google Earth and GPS tracks. There's a lot you can do in Google Earth. Feel free to play around with it and See if you can make it work for you. If you found this video interesting, please consider a donation to NASDA.